Hello and welcome to our audience tuning in from all over the world. I'm Fred Kemp. I'm President and CEO of the Atlantic Council, and I'm delighted to welcome you to today's event on the future of US-Taiwan economic relations, featuring keynote remarks by Her Excellency Bi-khim, Taiwan's new representative to the United States. Your Excellency, usually we would like to welcome you in a less virtual setting, but we have a global audience here. We believe in geographic distance, but not social distance or political distance. So we're going to bring everyone together around today's event, which is a timely one. It focuses on a number of recent developments surrounding one of the key strategic relationships for the United States in the Indo-Pacific region. In recent years, we've seen the United States and Taiwan take major steps toward deepening their relationship, particularly as both US-China competition and cross-strait relations heat up. In recent months, we've seen the highest level visits by US officials to Taiwan in decades, a joint declaration on 5G security, approvals of additional arms sales, US arms sales to Taiwan, and most significantly for today's discussion, the establishment of the US-Taiwan Economic Prosperity Partnership Dialogue earlier this month. As we look ahead to the next US administration and the future of US strategy in the Indo-Pacific, it will be critical for the United States and Taiwan to continue to cooperate to support peace and prosperity in the region and beyond. As a thriving democracy and global leader, and let me underscore that, global leader in the response to COVID-19, Taiwan will undoubtedly continue to play a crucial role in these efforts. And in fact, Your Excellency, if this were not a meeting on the economics of our relationship, I would ask you, what can the United States learn from Taiwan's remarkable response to COVID-19, which really is world-leading? Today's event is hosted by the Asia Security Initiative, housed within the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security, capably led by Dr. Mian Oh, just as the Scowcroft Center itself is so capably led by Barry Pavel. I hope today's discussion will help forward its mission, the Scowcroft Center's mission of promoting forward-looking strategies and solutions for the most pressing issues in the Indo-Pacific region, including China's rise, and the aim is to optimize cooperation between the United States and its regional allies and partners. I'm delighted to say that we've gathered a strong panel to discuss the future of this very important relationship. And most importantly, we are fortunate to be hosting Representative Hsiao for keynote remarks. Before I turn the floor to her, allow me briefly to introduce Representative Hsiao and her many accomplishments. Prior to her current position, she served as senior advisor to the president of the National Security Council of Taiwan. She also served 4 terms in the Taiwanese legislature, where she was ranking member of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, and also the chair of the USA caucus in the Legislative Yuan. Representative Hsiao has taken on numerous leadership roles in international organizations, such as chair of the Council of Asian Liberals and Democrats, an organization representing Asian democratic political parties, and a founding board member of the Taiwan Foundation for Democracy. The Scowcroft Center was also fortunate to host her in April 2019 for a discussion on democracy and disinformation while she was still a legislator. Once again, thank you so much for all of you for tuning in, and I will now turn the floor over to Representative Hsiao.
Well, thank you, Mr. Kemp, for organizing this and for hosting me this afternoon. Given the severity of this pandemic situation, I hope everyone is staying safe at home. This is the first time for me to be at home without any technical staff support in taking part in one of these events, and please bear with me if there are any technical issues. But I'm especially grateful that the Atlantic Council chose a topic that is so important and relevant to Taiwan's interests and our aspirations for the bilateral relationship with the United States. Certainly, the implications of stronger Taiwan-US economic relations affect not only our two countries, but the Indo-Pacific region at large. And even at a time of great change, following the elections here in the United States, our longer-term strategic interest on this critical matter has not shifted. As some members of our audience may know, last week Taiwan and the United States held the inaugural Economic Prosperity Partnership Dialogue. This marked a major step forward in our bilateral economic relationship. I'm thankful that Undersecretary Keith Kropp, who has really been a friend of Taiwan in so many ways, has such a strong force behind holding these very important talks. And with him leading the US delegation, we made significant progress in a number of areas. There was broad agreement that Taiwan would continue to work with the US on expanding cooperation in supply chain security, telecommunications security, global health, as well as science and technology. One recurring difficult issue for Taiwan is in the field of investment screening, where international cooperation is necessary to understand a company's full background. We were pleased both sides also made progress here with plans for additional engagements between our Investment Commission and CFIUS. The inclusion of my friend, Ambassador Kelly Curry, the U.S. Ambassador at Large for Global Women's Issues, also highlighted the contributions both sides can make in cooperation towards women's economic empowerment around the world. We were also able to capitalize on the signing of an infrastructure finance MOU in September with Treasury by having further discussions on how Taiwan and the US would be able to cooperate in infrastructure projects in third countries, particularly in Southeast Asia. Just prior to the talks, both sides finalized a broad economic MOU establishing a recurring platform for future discussions, and we aim to build on these accomplishments in the years ahead. We also agreed to move ahead on a separate science and technology agreement to enhance bilateral cooperation in these key topics. This dialogue was important, not only in terms of the issues discussed, but also because it provides further momentum for Taiwan-US economic cooperation. It follows a number of critical economic advances we've made over the past year, ranging from TSMC's announcement to bring cutting-edge semiconductor manufacturing to Arizona to growing investments by US technology firms into Taiwan. In August, President Tsai Ing-wen of Taiwan also made a politically difficult announcement to lift market restrictions on US pork and beef products in order to address long-standing trade barriers between our two countries. Stronger Taiwan-US economic ties are crucial at a time when economic integration is taking place across the Asia-Pacific region. We have watched the inauguration of RCEP, which, while limited in scope, has enormous symbolic purpose. More countries are also indicating their interest in joining CPTPP, another bloc that is shaping trade across the region. While Taiwan has made our intentions clear, as well as engaged in the necessary preparatory work, we know that the road for Taiwan to be able to participate in these multilateral agreements will be difficult given geostrategic challenges at the moment. Following these recent economic engagements, we believe that a logical next step is to engage in discussions for a Taiwan-US bilateral trade agreement. Our economies are highly complementary to one another. Look inside any Apple product and you will find a multitude of components that are made in Taiwan. Tesla cars, which are made in California, also contain critical technologies and components that are from Taiwan, and essential to this Made in America industry. Examples like this exist throughout our supply chain and are reasons why a trade agreement makes economic sense. The case for bilateral trade is also supported by growing international concern about the integrity of supply chains. This current pandemic has underscored questions about dependencies on certain countries, as well as the need for building supply chains between trusted partners. With 5G, the Internet of Things or IoT, AI or artificial intelligence, and other new technologies increasingly bringing to the forefront fresh concerns about data integrity, surveillance, and the need for clean networks. It is more than ever for Taiwan and the United States to build secure bridges between our industries. There is also a strong geopolitical case to be made for enhanced dialogue in this area. Taiwan's national security is integral to the peace and stability of the region. Yet without economic security or trade autonomy, this would be a very challenging project. As a government that oversees a free market economy, it is incumbent on us to promote trade diversification by providing greater economic linkages and market opportunities to our companies. A new trade framework with the United States will deliver this, ensuring that our economy is less subject to political trends in the region. We believe that such actions are wholly consistent with our shared interests. Since President Tsai's election in 2016, she has been clear-eyed on the need for Taiwan to enhance its economic linkages with the international community. Taiwan was one of the first countries in the region to embark on a southbound policy, strengthening trade with countries in South and also Southeast Asia. She is also committed to a stronger economic and trade relationship with the United States, our second largest trading partner and most important security partner. Over the past 4 years, we've seen bilateral trade increase by over 30%, catapulting Taiwan to become the 9th largest trading partner of the US this year. Here in Washington, D.C., we're pleased that support for Taiwan-US relations has always remained solidly bipartisan. Following President Tsai's announcement of market openings for US pork and beef, representatives from both parties spoke out in favor of this decision. Earlier this year, over 160 members of the House and 50 senators signed joint letters to encourage the US government to initiate bilateral trade talks with Taiwan. We're grateful for these actions, and we look forward to working with the next administration here to continue the progress that we've already made. I want to again express appreciation to Mr. Kemp and your colleagues at the Atlantic Council for holding this timely event. I think these discussions on such timely issues really help to further the Taiwan-US partnership, and I look forward to hearing about the discussions in this time ahead. Thank you so much again.
Thank you so much, Representative Shao, for your insightful keynote remarks at this critical time for US-Taiwan relations. We're truly honored to be hosting you again since we saw you in April 2019. I'm Mian Oh, Director and Senior Fellow of the Atlantic Council's Asia Security Initiative, housed within the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security. And I'm delighted to be moderating this afternoon's panel session on the future of US-Taiwan economic relations. Today's discussion is a rare opportunity for a deep dive into where US-Taiwan bilateral economic ties have been, where they are headed, and what that means for the US economic strategy in the Indo-Pacific as we look ahead in an incoming Biden administration. We are fortunate today to be joined by a fantastic panel with deep expertise on the United States and Taiwan, and I'm eager to jump into the discussion to hear their insights into this timely and important topic. With that in mind, I'd like to introduce our panelists. First, we have Rupert Hammond Chambers, who is the president of the US-Taiwan Business Council and managing director at Bauer Group Asia, as well as a board member at the Project 2049 Institute and member of the National Committee on US-China Relations. Next, we have Dr. David Dollar, Senior Fellow in the Brookings China Center and host of the Brookings Trade Podcast, Dollar and Cents. Previously, David was the US Treasury's economic and financial emissary to China and spent more than 2 decades with the World Bank, including work as a country director for China and Mongolia. Finally, we have Riley Walters, Senior Policy Analyst and Economist in the Heritage Foundation. Riley specializes in Northeast Asian macroeconomic issues as well as foreign investment, emerging technologies, and cybersecurity. So Riley is having some technical difficulties and for the time being, planning to stay off camera to maximize bandwidth. So thank you for your patience and hope he can come back to the screen. And with that, thank you again for all joining us today. And I'd like to kick off today's discussion by asking each of you to offer opening remarks on a different aspect of today's topic of discussion. Before we do, I'd like to remind our audience watching today's live event that they can submit questions via Twitter using the hashtag #ACAsia. Okay, so let's get started. Rupert, to kick off today's discussion, I'd like to ask you about how deepening ties between the United States and Taiwan are playing out in Taiwan. What can you tell us about the politics of trade in Taiwan?
Mian, thank you so much for hosting this event. Fred, thank you for your leadership at the Atlantic Council, and Mian, to your colleague James as well. Thank you. A great way to tee up this event in my view. Taiwan's economic importance is a study in contrast at times, where you have arguably one of the world's most important economies, certainly in technology, a global leader in innovation, and globally leading innovative companies like Taiwan Semiconductor have positioned Taiwan as an indispensable partner in the global supply chain. And I think particularly that is relevant in the technology space, and no more so in the last couple of years, as fortunately governments and leaders have really started to grapple with the importance of the semiconductor industry, not just as a more parochial economic sector within an economy, but as a strategic issue, both to strengthen an economy as well as potentially to pressure other economies. So Taiwan, over the past few decades, has built itself into an absolute monster, particularly in the technology space. However, its diplomatic isolation creates real challenges for Taiwan to participate proactively in bilateral and multilateral trade liberalization. And this continues to come up over and over again, even when we experience a period of global trade retrenchment, I think is perhaps our way of putting it, over the past 4 years, as the United States has taken a closer look at what its economic interests are and where it feels the pluses and minuses are in respect to global engagement, has certainly pulled back, as Mr. Trump did at the beginning of his term in office for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But I think, as many, if not all, are aware, Mrs. Clinton was almost certainly going to do the same thing. The trade consensus here in the United States has really shifted, and the line has moved, I think, more towards parochial views on economic self-interest and less of a forward-leaning view on trade engagement, particularly through negotiation. And Taiwan, as I've noted, is really unique. Well, not, if not uniquely, certainly one of the very few trading powers in the world that doesn't have the, if not the only one, that doesn't have the opportunity to proactively engage itself. I actually want to take this advantage of reading a quote from Fred Kemp's book, Berlin 1961. It's excellent if you haven't read it. But this is, Fred is quoting President Kennedy. But I want to see how quickly you all can see that you can take out Berlin and the Soviet Union, replace it with Taiwan and China effortlessly, to understand how American national interest in respect to Taiwan has not changed. This is an area, said Kennedy, where every president of the US since World War II has been committed by treaty and other contractual rights, and where every president has reaffirmed his faithfulness to those obligations. If we were expelled from that area, and if we accepted the loss of our rights, no one would have any confidence in US commitments and pledges. US national security is involved in this matter, because if we were to accept the Soviet proposal, US commitments would be regarded as a mere scrap of paper. I think that quote is hugely relevant still today, I'll bet, in respect to Taiwan, and really allows us to construct a robust reason as to why American national interest is so deep and broad on the island, with the island, pardon me. On the island, in respect to trade, you have these contrasts, as I've noted, where the private sector is going great guns. You can see it through patents. You can see it through innovation. As Bi-khim noted earlier on, you can see it through the prism of multinational investment on the island. Micron, Google, Microsoft, Corning, and many others have huge commitments through R&D and production on the island, among many others. But the island's government cannot proactively engage. We have the US situation. Since 2016, the US and Taiwan have not held a trade and investment framework agreement. And more recently, in Taiwan's relationship with the Japanese, there has been a referendum in place these past 2 years that expired this month, actually, on banning food from the Fukushima prefecture and surrounding prefectures, which has also significantly complicated trade relations between the US, between Taiwan and Japan. And just to show you how difficult it is for a sitting Taiwan president to make strategic level economic decisions, it emerged to be clear that when President Tsai was elected in 2016 at the start of her first term, the Abe government signaled to her government, and they have excellent ties, that they would be willing, should Taiwan be willing to address the Fukushima food bans, to enter into some sort of free trade negotiation. The nomenclature would be different, but the bottom line would be it would be a fully comprehensive trade negotiation. And the Tsai government was unable to move forward it because of the domestic political challenges of making changes, concessions around agricultural issues. We fast forward to today, or actually to August, the end of August. Tsai Ing-wen has been re-elected as she was in January of this year. She receives a significant level of support, and she also, her party, the Democratic Progressive Party, also secures or re-secures its majority in the Lifa Yuan, Taiwan's parliament. And President Tsai, after consulting with her trade team, and it's excellent, by the way, decides to invest some of her political capital at the end of August, when she announces that Taiwan will address head-on the outstanding trade issues specific to ractopamine in pork and some issues surrounding beef. Over the last few months, through that, she has both articulated the hope for a reciprocal expression of support commercially from the United States, a bilateral trade agreement. And she's very, very consistent on that, while continuing to move forward on the bureaucratic changes necessary, some of which related to pork, she can do through executive fiat, and the beef changes will require some degree of legislative action. But she's continued to move forward. However, as some of you might have seen, as recently as this end of last week, at the end of last week, the opposition in Taiwan is fierce in regards to this. Why? Primarily not because it's not. I mean, food safety is the core of it. It's the petrol that fuels the fire. But as a practical matter, opposition parties, when agricultural issues have come up in Taiwan domestic politics, have seen it as a political opportunity. And candidly, the DPP did in 2010 and 2009, excuse me, when the Kuomintang under Ma Ying-jeou's presidency attempted to tackle some of these agricultural issues specific to beef, and the DPP were fully in opposition. And it was a difficult period then, and we're in a difficult period now. The optics of last week's fighting in the parliament, pig offal being thrown at the prime minister while he was attempting to make a speech. I think both cuts at the periodic theater that can be Taiwan's politics, which is regrettable, but also I think both the tension within these issues as well as the political opportunity the KMT sees here. To be candid, the KMT needs, in my view, to be a little bit careful. Taiwan functions in a multi-party system, and at the very least, to remain the thriving democracy it is, it requires two strong parties to represent at differing times the presidency. If we look at history and go back about 16 or 17 years, the KMT got caught in a situation, well, not caught in a situation, the KMT entered a situation where they were blocking the arms budget under Chen Shui-bian, and this lasted for over 3 years. It caused tremendous tension in the US-Taiwan relationship, and the KMT very much bore the brunt of it. So my hope is that obviously the KMT can act in accordance with its role as the loyal opposition, but equally I think obviously we want to ensure that United States products are not accused of being something that they're not. I probably have a couple more minutes. Mian, is that?
I actually, so looking forward to getting into many of important issues you raised after our other opening remarks, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, do you want to stop here?
Yeah, so thank you. Okay. Yeah. And so Riley, over to you. And from a US perspective, how are you seeing US-Taiwan trade issues playing out?
Well, real quick, can you hear me all right?
I can hear you all right.
Excellent. All right, that's all that really matters. Or else it's just a waste of all of our time. I think, well, thank you and thank everyone for being here. Obviously, I think we have a great cast today, and I'm just honored to be a part of this. The US-Taiwan relationship is important, as it's been put so eloquently already. I think there's a little bit more if I could add to that. Taiwan is a very important link in this supply chain. It is now our 9th largest trading partner for goods. Last year we traded 105 billion worth of goods and services, which supports jobs and economic activity, not just within the United States, but within Taiwan. And a lot of this trade is, we're not trading just knickknacks and tchotchkes anymore. But critical information and communication technology like computers and semiconductors. And Taiwan is actually becoming an increasingly important, I think, energy partner as well. If you actually look at the trade statistics, last year we exported more oil to Taiwan than semiconductors. And so I think that goes to answer some of the questions that folks have about not just economic security, but energy security and so on and so forth. When we are looking at the bilateral relationship, the U.S. is actually Taiwan's second greatest investment destination. And as already been mentioned, earlier this year, we got some great news regarding specific bilateral investment plans. TSMC, Taiwan's leading semiconductor manufacturer, announced this $12 billion investment into Phoenix, Arizona. which will help, I think, alleviate some of the concerns that, for example, the security community has about Taiwan and its chip making facilities that might be too close to proximity to China, but also that with that comes other investments as well. It's sort of this snowballing effect, and so there's this new $3.5 billion subsidiary that TSMC is setting up to help with the construction of this plant. There's going to be suppliers also moving to Phoenix, and so it definitely has this supporting effect. Bilaterally, of course, looking in the other direction, Google, AMD, NVIDIA, Apple, they all rely on TSMC and other Taiwanese companies for their manufacturing. Microsoft itself announced this significant investment earlier this year to build one of its first regional cloud data centers within Taiwan. I think it was estimated to be roughly $10 billion worth investment. So if you just think about the last year, that's roughly greater than 20 billion worth of bilateral investment that was announced. So nothing insignificant. Now, there are hurdles, as Rupert's already sort of talked about, to the economic relationship. The pork and beef issues, it almost seems like they were, effectively an institutionalized problem. They continued on for years, and the Trump administration just decided they've had enough with it. But now that that's sort of off the table, or it could be off the table, it certainly opens up, or it seems like it could open up a lot more doors for opportunity. There are some other hurdles, of course. The USTR has this list of trade barriers that it will publish every year, and listing some more specific issues. But you could argue not as politically charged, I think, as the pork and beef issue. And there are some other emerging areas that could be a problem in the future. It always depends, I think, depending on some of the more political priorities of each administration. But that being said, I think now there's far more greater areas for opportunity and cooperation than barriers that should be restricting how the U.S. and Taiwan engage. Of course, the U.S. and Taiwan, for the two of us, a free bilateral trade agreement is long overdue. And of course, the pork and beef issue should be the catalyst that really spark that. And the U.S. really needs to take advantage of some of the risks that the Tsai administration has taken to pursue this bilateral engagement. But the most recent economic dialogue, I think, is actually goes beyond that. I think it's more, not to mince words, but I think it's probably more important than a bilateral FTA almost, because it goes beyond simply just some of the trade barriers that we have between the U.S. and Taiwan. It goes more toward talking about ways that we can cooperate more. And so it was actually something I'm happy about, because an economic dialogue, a high-level dialogue with Taiwan, is something that I actually recommended a couple of years ago after watching how the U.S. and Japan announced a high-level bilateral economic dialogue, which eventually led to trade negotiations. But for Taiwan's case, I think it's more important because they are being left out of a lot of these regional trade agreements. Obviously, CPTPP went into force 2 years ago. RCEP was just signed 2 weeks ago. I believe Taiwan has voiced its desire to enter these deals, but no one's willing to budge. And so, with that, they are losing out from these other countries who are establishing their own standards, making trade and investment flows a little bit easier between themselves, and not necessarily a positive for Taiwan, which I would argue that what we want is to have a successful, thriving Taiwanese economy. So I think some of the highlights from the economic dialogue and some of the things that came out of the dialogue, they were really good at highlighting a lot of areas for cooperation. And so just to sort of list some of those, I think right off the top of it, the combination of integrating the U.S.'s Indo-Pacific strategy and Taiwan's new southbound policy is critical. There's a lot of areas for cooperation that they've highlighted. Health security is one, women's empowerment, obviously making sure that the 5G, not just the infrastructure, but supply chain and all that is secure is upright, of utmost importance. Cooperating on infrastructure, energy, transportation, and they even went to go as far as say that they want to negotiate a joint agreement on science and technology, which again, great step. I think something to look forward to as these economic dialogues become an annual, if not more regular event to not just work within the State Department, but all levels of government, which can be difficult sometimes for particularly the U.S. government, but hopefully lessons to be worked out in the future. Another big issue, I think, and certainly something that should happen is, as Representative Shao mentioned, is this greater cooperation between U.S. and Taiwanese investment reviewing mechanisms. So CFIUS, if you're familiar with the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, as far back as 2016, when we were beginning to talk about reforming CFIUS, one of the arguments even then was bringing in partners and allies. And so this is just another one of those areas of cooperation. I think going forward, just to end my comments, there is a lot of bipartisan support in Congress for U.S. and Taiwan. Beyond that, the State Department's initiative to build this economic prosperity network and shore up our like-minded friends and partners is an effort that will continue and hopefully continue as well. And so I'm really looking forward just to the next year, if not next few years, of ways that the U.S. and Taiwan can engage more. Thank you.
Thank you, Riley. Last but certainly not least, David, as someone with deep on-the-ground economic expertise on China, what can you tell us about cross-strait relations and where they fit into broader discussion to include China? Because Taiwan's economy is deeply embedded into China's economy.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to join this panel on the future of US-Taiwan economic relations. And I think we've heard a lot of broad enthusiasm for improving US-Taiwan economic relations. But my job as an economist is to bring a little bit of dismal news into the discussion, or at least to raise the number of obstacles that we have to keep in mind as we pursue this relationship. So first point I want to make follows directly on from Miyun's question. Taiwan is very deeply integrated with the mainland economy. Taiwan has 4 times as much exports to the mainland as it does to the United States. And a lot of this really makes economic sense because of geography and complementarity of the Taiwan economy with the mainland economy. I think this is quite a natural development. And it's something we just need to keep in mind, that there's a lot of trade and investment back and forth across the strait. Now, the second point I want to make concerns global value chains. So you're not just shipping products back and forth across the Taiwan Strait. In the US and Taiwan, we're not just exchanging products. What we have are really complicated, deeply integrated value chains. Much of what the US imports from the mainland contains Taiwan value added. So a lot of these electronic products that we import from China, they have important content coming from Taiwan. Now, it's natural for these supply chains to evolve. You have rising wages in China. Initially, China specialized in the labor-intensive assembly at the end of many value chains, but wages have been rising in China. China's been moving more into the middle of value chains, and some labor-intensive activity was already leaving China before these recent crises. And then I would say you have to add on top of that the COVID pandemic and global recession, the US-China trade war. So there's a lot of uncertainty about global value chains right now. And I would be cautious about making predictions, but I don't expect global value chains to go away. There'll be some evolution, but they're very likely to continue to expand. About 2/3 of world trade takes place in value chains that cross at least 2 borders during production. and that's likely to be maintained and maybe increased. Now, some of the changes we see, as I said, some of the labor-intensive assembly was already leaving China. That seems to be accelerating, particularly to Vietnam. But at the same time, China's exports of machinery and medium technology components to countries like Vietnam are on the rise. So it's perfectly sensible for Taiwan to have a Southern strategy. But as Taiwan develops its relations with Southeast Asia, you're going to be importing a lot of Chinese content through that trade because China is investing in exporting to those ASEAN countries, and they all welcome that very much. I think we'll get a little bit more into the supply chains, but there are a lot of different types of supply chains. So it's possible that China can be pushed out of some specific product lines, but it's unlikely that China will be pushed out of all these value chains. It produces a third of global manufacturers. It exports 10 times as much as Vietnam, for example. It's just hard to see anybody stepping in, playing the same kind of role that China plays. And then the last point I'd make on supply chains is the original stereotype was thinking of assembly in China for export. You know, you bring in the parts, often from Taiwan, you assemble, you export. But increasingly, value chains are in China in order to sell to the domestic market. It's certainly true in automobiles, increasingly true in electronics and many other areas. So since the final market is in China, it's not realistic to think that those supply chains are going to be leaving China. If you know, global situation makes value chains riskier, if anything, more production will move to China because that's where the final market is for many goods. And then the last point, I can just be very brief because others have already mentioned the importance of these new trade agreements, CPTPP and RCEP. Analysis shows that Taiwan is in fact the big loser from RCEP because it will divert a certain amount of trade away from Taiwan to the members of that agreement. And I think that's actually a very significant agreement that will tend to solidify the Asian value chains and particularly continue to support China's role at the heart of a lot of value chains. Now, I do think one role for the United States is to try to create diplomatic space for Taiwan, which is not easy. But I see it as unfortunate that the US has gotten away from these big trade agreements. If the US were in the TPP, for example, we could push our other partners to welcome Taiwan. It's not going to be easy, but if you don't see the United States in these big agreements, then it's really hard to see how there's going to be diplomatic space for Taiwan. And the value of a US-Taiwan free trade agreement will potentially be diminished if we are not both participating in these larger Asia-wide and eventually global trade agreements. So I'll stop there, Mi-Yun, and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you so much, David. And now I'd like to just briefly spend time on talking about the U.S.-China relations, the prospect under the incoming Biden administration. Should we expect the current trend of deepening U.S.-Taiwan relations, economic relations, to continue under the next administration? And in what ways might President-elect Biden take a different approach? And I'd like to start with Rupert first, and maybe you can add in addition to your views, and I'd like to hear your views about what the RCEP means to Taiwan.
Thank you. I see the Biden administration, at least at this juncture, as more a custodian of US-Taiwan relations than leaning into it. Now, to break that down a wee bit, we've just gone through the most extraordinary positive, certainly in my professional career, and I started this in '94. We've gone through the most extraordinary and positive expansion of US-Taiwan relations. And I think it's unreasonable to think that Mr. Biden and his colleagues, even if they were predisposed, would undertake a similar expansion and deepening, to further deepen and further expand in a way the Trump administration has done. So what I expect and certainly what I'm hoping for is a consolidation of the gains that have been made. If that were to take place across all areas, I mean, economic relations, of course, is an area that we're here to discuss, but in all other areas, that would be excellent. If I had one downside risk I'm concerned about, it's the return of single issue foreign policy with Mr. Biden's administration. We saw it with the Bush administration and their focus on the DPRK negotiations in the second Bush term. And again, we saw it with Mr. Obama and his administration in his second term over the Paris Accord. And the Chinese capitalized mightily during those periods when it became clear that the sitting administrations were focused almost to the extent of marginalizing other areas of American national interest, and we went backwards in those areas, in my view. I'm concerned about that with Mr. Biden and his potential focus on climate change. My hope is that that will be an issue with the Chinese, not the issue with the Chinese. If it's the latter, I would worry that US-Taiwan relations will move into difficult waters.
Thank you, Rupert. And over to you, Riley.
The next few years, I think we could. I share some of Rupert's concerns. I'm worried that foreign policy under a new administration can get muddled, focusing on specific issues. But what's interesting, thinking about the last 4 years, I don't think there's any disagreement that U.S.-Taiwan relations over the last 4 years have been just outstanding. And I'm not saying that the next administration could completely undo that or undo any of that, honestly. What I find almost not ironic about this, but a coincidence is, I think ideologically, the Tsai administration is probably more aligned with how the Biden administration sees itself. Certainly, there's a lot of concern about climate change and global diversity, and those take, I think, perhaps more precedent or more interest than maybe some of the issues that we've been talking about, like proximity to China, things of that sort. So it'll be interesting to see how things change. I don't expect them to change that much. I don't expect things to get worse. I just hope that Asia can remain a priority, and Taiwan at the top of the list of countries that the U.S. continues to engage with.
David, would you like? Yeah, please.
Yes, go a different direction and be optimistic that relations between the U.S. and Taiwan will improve during the Biden administration for 3 reasons. First, as already was mentioned, there's very strong bipartisan support in favor of Taiwan, so that's the foundation. Secondly, President-elect Biden has written about the importance of rebuilding our alliances with democratic allies in Asia and specifically Taiwan. So I think the Biden administration will put more emphasis on human rights and democracy than the outgoing administration. And then third, I think a Cold War between the U.S. and China is not good for Taiwan at all. It creates a very bad environment for Taiwan economically and diplomatically. So I don't expect the Biden administration to be friendly with the mainland, but I expect there to be stable relations, some cooperation on issues like climate change, and frankly, a move away from a Cold War, which is unnecessary.
Thank you, David. And we have about 10 minutes. And I'd like to go back to the global supply chain issue in order to put bilateral relations into a broader context. And just starting with Rupert. So you mentioned that other major players like Samsung, I'm talking about one of your recent tweeting, and like Samsung is planning to invest $10 billion in Austin, Texas for its second US plant. And that is obviously after this TSMC's big announcement. And you said that this is a domino effect to build more resilient semiconductor supply chains in order to reduce dependence on China. So how should we understand these investment decisions in a broader economic context?
Well, thank you for following me on Twitter, first and foremost. I appreciate that. I would tee up two thoughts in response to this question. When we think about supply chains, David really captures a lot of this in his comments as he does in his work. When we think about supply chains, we think about vulnerabilities potentially as a consequence of pandemics, acts of God, if you'll excuse the expression, or potentially acts of China. When you think about China's hostility towards Taiwan and the possibility, God forbid, that we should see a disruption in supply and that critical components for integrators would be severed. Then we look at the relationship between the US and critical component suppliers, particularly in areas like the semiconductor. I mean, I think the semiconductor industry actually occupies an area above and beyond everything else. Those that are manufacturing the chips, Samsung and TSMC are at the top of the list, are under pressure for two reasons. One, because of the potential for disruption, and the other is the demand from customers to also address this potential disruption. So you are seeing, in this instance, onshoring in the United States as a consequence to mitigate some of that disruption. It also, in fairness, is a function of the fact that this outgoing government here in the States has been demanding that. Have we seen a massive return of investment or a massive response to it? No, we haven't. We just haven't seen what they have argued for. But we have seen some. And in this instance, in the semiconductor industry, I would certainly point to as an an area of emerging importance for the US as we see a return to critical manufacturing at the highest levels, clustering around it. You're seeing some of the critical suppliers in the Taiwan supply chain move with TSMC or announce the intention to move with TSMC. And that will all be good for the US ecosystem, all the way through from research, development, to production, and of course, the training of critical personnel, engineers, and others to participate in that move.
Thank you, Rupert. And I'd like to follow on reshoring, onshoring. So David, do you think the reshoring drive will continue going forward? And how would this reshoring fit into the effort to realign the global supply chains of major industry that you talked about and what that means to Taiwan?
So there's no question the U.S. has the economic power to bring certain supply chains back to the U.S. So I want to reiterate, I emphasize that there are a lot of different types of supply chains. If you look at military hardware, which is a major industry in the US, that was already completely domestic, right? So all the military hardware is produced in the United States. It would be relatively easy to add some additional product lines. So for example, we could add semiconductors, treat it the same way we treat sourcing our military jets, for example. And I think some of that will definitely happen. But what I'm skeptical about is this broad idea that there'll be a lot of reshoring of manufacturing back to the US to the point where you can actually see it in the macroeconomic data. There's no evidence of this so far. The trend in manufacturing production, manufacturing employment, they were exactly the same under Trump as they were in the second Obama administration. You look at, there was a recent survey of American firms on the mainland, and almost none of them are considering reshoring back to the US, though I think about 1/6 were looking at some reshoring to lower wage countries in Southeast Asia, or they were thinking about diversifying, maybe investing in Taiwan. But as far as coming back to the US, virtually none of those firms. So I just think for many, many product lines, it's not realistic to think that there's going to be a lot of return of manufacturing production in the United States. But again, we can choose specific areas that are important to national security, and we can make sure those are produced in the US or together with close allies. But we shouldn't confuse that with what's happening in the overall economy.
Thank you, David and Riley. So you mentioned that bilateral FTA is a long overdue, and you talk about economic prosperity network. And I'd like to hear from you about the challenges and opportunities that face with this global supply chain effort. And obviously, you know, what two countries have agreed on: infrastructure, energy, supply chains, and investment screening, 5G, certainly a lot of issues. So in terms of this global supply chain or any other issue, we'd like to share challenges and opportunities just going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge is, I just hope we're not biting off too much than we can chew at this point. It's a lot, you know, and I think even just looking at some of the more specific issues, I think even the US doesn't really know what it wants to do on some of these things. CFIUS hasn't finalized some of its rules on emerging technologies. The Blue Dot Network, I know there's competing opinions on what the utility of that actually is, along with the Development Finance Corporation, whether it's actually doing what it should be or what some people would prefer it to be doing. And so, you know, within the United States, there's a lot of disagreement about this. And so trying to get Taiwan on board when the perception within the United States could be changing, I think can be a challenge going forward. Now, the bilateral FTA, you know, it's sort of like David's mentioned already. It's just sort of one piece of all this, and so, you know, the United States, I think, does need to engage more in the region as a whole economically. I think that's what this, you know, the Economic Prosperity Network is an attempt to do. Obviously, we do have some trade agreements in the region already. We have sort of this, who knows what's happening with this trade deal with Japan, whether that's going to continue anytime soon. But, you know, engaging more on a multilateral effort, I think, is important. I think it was mentioned in the economic dialogue that happened last week. You know, this idea of bringing in more third parties into this sort of, not just the dialogue, but some of these efforts. And so I think that could definitely help. But again, you know, I think some might be a hit, some might be a miss. We'll have to wait and see, but we should at least try.
Thank you so much, everyone. I wish we have more time because we have so many pressing issues. So I would like to just mention quickly that we're going to release our report as a part of a partnership with TechGrow on December 17 on how to counter Chinese disinformation. So please stay tuned on that. And I'd like to thank again to Representative Shao, Fred Kemp, and our distinguished speakers today, and also the audience joining us today. And thank you so much.